Live from the world headquarters of RT America in our nation's capital, this is the news with Rick Sanchez.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rick Sanchez, and I want to welcome our viewers all over the world who are watching us, including those of you who are watching us using the portable TV app, usually on your phones. Aren't you cool? There are several stories coming into play today that, when combined, they go a long way in understanding the state of affairs between the world's superpowers. First, there's this. We are learning that once again, Washington has rejected Russia's offer to normalize relations between the two nuclear superpowers. In fact, Russia's foreign minister is saying that the Kremlin proposed a complete reset in the two countries' strained relations, to say the least, but the Biden administration has decided to turn it down. Now, why would we not want to have better relations with Russia? It's an important question that we need to ask ourselves as Americans. Meanwhile, China, who the U.S. is threatening militarily by sending billions of fighter jets and tanks to Taiwan, says China, appears to be responding to the threat by building up its Navy with the addition of 3 new warships just in a single day. In fact, the U.S. Department of Defense, DOD, has informed Congress that China now boasts the largest Navy in the entire world. China, not us. While China's growing Navy may be a threat to the cause of global peace and something for the U.S. State Department to reckon with, there's something else that may get the State Department's attention, in fact, even more so. Newsweek is reporting that China is now reaching out to build a military alliance with Russia. Yes. And here's how it happened. First, President Putin declared that if any country crossed the red line, quote, stop quote, it would, again, quote, regret its deeds more than it has regretted anything in a long time. Stop quote. Then, when asked about Mr. Putin's comments, China's foreign minister said that China will continue to understand and support Russia in their respective sovereignty, security, and development interests. So here's the question. Is it possible that our foreign policy here in America is creating an alliance among our adversaries in some measure? We're going to look at that right here on the News with Rick Sanchez, because it's an important story, one you may not hear anywhere else, and because we think it's time to do news again. All right, so let's start with this. Here's the list of questions we think you're going to be asking tomorrow after watching our newscast today. Should the Biden administration improve relations or try with China, Russia, or both? Will authorities be able to prevent racial unrest after the shooting in North Carolina? And why is Redacted's Lee Camp so worked up about the Biden defense budget? All right, let's get started. When asked recently about forging a military alliance with China, Russian President Vladimir Putin said that it was, quote, possible to imagine it, and pointed to the fact that the two countries, China and Russia, have already participated in exercises and already are sharing sensitive military technologies. It still seems, though, that given his druthers, Mr. Putin would prefer to have better relations with the United States, if somehow that could be made to happen. Let's start with this. RT correspondent Alex Mihailovich.
They are two countries that have a long-standing history of being united in diplomacy.
China and Russia have always been firmly opposed to the so-called long-arm jurisdiction of a small number of countries, especially for the United States to impose unilateral illegal sanctions on other countries.
Recently, China and Russia have also reiterated their military support for one another. This month, in a State of the Union address, Russian President Vladimir Putin, following years of steady provocation from the U.S. and its allies, warned the West not to cross the red line.
Мы действительно хотим
We really want to have good relationships with all members of the international community, even those with whom relationships have been strained lately, to say the least. We really don't want to burn the bridges, but if some mistake our good intentions for indifference or weakness and intend to burn or even blow up those bridges themselves, Russia's response will be asymmetrical, quick, and tough.
Putin also did not fail to mention Russia's friendship with China, calling the two nations comprehensive strategic partners of coordination in the new era. China was quick to reply in kind. China's foreign ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin said that the two countries will continue to understand and support each other in safeguarding our respective sovereignty, security, and development interests. In January, Wang said that he sees no limit for how far this cooperation can go. Short of being a military alliance, China and Russia have participated in military drills together and have shared sensitive technology. Notably, the navies of the two nations have conducted numerous exercises with one another, and united, are a force to be reckoned with. According to the Pentagon, the PRC has the largest navy in the world, with an overall battle force of approximately 350 ships and submarines, including over 130 major surface combatants. Today, the Russian Navy operates about 360 vessels of all types. In comparison, as of early 2020, the U.S. Navy's battle fleet is approximately 293 ships. However, on average, they are bigger than Russia's. America's close ally, the UK, has a navy which is a shadow of its former self. The once powerful navy boasts roughly 89 ships today. That said, the US and UK have continued to flex their muscles on the water. The UK is testing Russia by sending ships into the Black Sea, and both the US and UK navies are making their presence known in the South China Sea. With the US and its allies bringing their military technology to China and Russia's doorsteps, this has made the two nations grow even closer. While both have shown their willingness to work with the U.S., they are now also displaying their might to deter America from pushing things too far. For RT, I'm Alex Mihailovich.
Good stuff, Alex. Thanks so much. Joining us now, former Naval Intelligence Officer John Jordan and former UK MP George Galloway. John, I want to begin with you. If you were advising President Biden, what would your counsel to him be, given the setup that we just described for our viewers?
Well, first of all, there is no Biden foreign policy, but I'd be to advising to build one. It would be, hey, China is our adversary for so many reasons, but Russia doesn't need to be. Russia is a Christian country. Russia isn't trying to export a version of the world or a totalitarian government and impose it on it. So the Soviet Union is over. You don't need to make all of these enemies. So I would be advising to try to create daylight between China and Russia right now, because you're creating an alliance that doesn't need to be there. Moreover, the Chinese Navy, just to point out, doesn't really have the ability to project force more than a couple hundred kilometers beyond its coast, and isn't really able to protect its sea lanes of communication. So it's a little misleading to talk about numbers of ship and conflate that with capability and ability to project power and protect sea lanes. Those are different concepts.
So it's probably the DOD telling the Congress that so they can give them more funds, right? That's the reason they're saying, oh my God, look, China has the biggest Navy in the world. They're probably doing that so they can get more funding, right, John?
Well, I mean, every service is always trying to get more funding, even if it's at the expense of the Army and the Air Force. But the Chinese Navy may be larger in numbers, but it's how you count those ships. And the real difference here, Rick, is capability and ability to project power far from one's shores versus just number of ships. And China doesn't really have the ability to replenish and support and control ocean thousands of miles away and protect its sea lanes in the Indian Ocean. It can't really do that.
George, let me bring you in. How precarious a situation might it be, as we alluded to in our opening monologue, Russia and China building a military alliance of necessity?
Well, Napoleon never regretted anything more than marching on Moscow, and Hitler never regretted anything more than having a war on two fronts. The United States policy is a geopolitical and diplomatic mess. Even your other guest, who's visceral animosity to China I don't share, is correct about that. Why make two enemies at the same time, and why push them together in what would be, by anybody's metric, a very substantial adversary? Russia is no threat to the United States. It's a Christian, non-communist country. Why on earth are the United States refusing the opportunity to reset relations? It doesn't make any sense at all. Russia is a capitalist country, a European country, a Christian country that bears no animosity to the United States. Why make it an enemy, especially when you're pushing that enemy into the arms of another enemy, making the two of them together a very, very powerful potential foe?
What's your argument against what John just alluded to, that we should be very wary of China then, George?
Well, I think that the best thing to do with a rising power, and the British tried to do this, still try to do this, is to get alongside it and to influence it and be enriched by it. The argument when you have a new kid on the block is not to erect barbed wire around that new kid, but to take the wire down and get alongside it. If we did that, we would benefit from, and this was the previous policy, going back to President Nixon, who knew a whole lot more about foreign affairs than today's presidents seem to influence the course of action of that country. The U.S. did influence.
Let me give John a chance to respond to your proposition. Go ahead, John.
Well, first of all, you have to look at what Communist China is, and I agree largely for the first time with Mr. Galloway there in a lot of respects. George, agree with you, George, sometimes it's the first time. In this case, I do disagree. China is not just some new up-and-coming power. This is the Chinese Communist Party that has killed 30 million of its own people since 1949. This is a country which is imprisoning and enslaving the Uyghurs. This is a country which suppresses freedom and independent thought. This is not just some rising, sweet, independent power with that doesn't have a very bloody history and a history of malevolent behavior. So I think we have to treat China cautiously. You don't want to create conflict. You don't need to, but you need to send a clear message of resolve that, hey, if you want to join the international village of nations, there are certain rules that you have to abide by.
Two conflicting but respected points of view. My thanks to both of you gentlemen for sharing that with our viewers. My thanks once again. This is The News with Rick Sanchez. By the way, there's something happening right now that we need to tell you about. The judge in that case in Elizabeth City with the shooting of an African-American man by police has just released his ruling. John Huddy is going to be following that story for us. We're going to be joining John in just a minute, so stay right there. We've got some breaking news. Hey, welcome back. I'm Rick Sanchez. There's a new law in France that could allow the government there to legally spy on its own people. This measure had already passed in a temporary form. That's the way they always start, right? But it may now become permanent. And it would allow the government to track phone calls of its citizens, visit see what websites they are visiting, and track their social media posts as well. The aim, of course, isn't it always, to root out potential terrorists. RT's Charlotte Dubinsky files this report from Paris.
Less than a week after France's latest terror attack, and the government is attempting to show its mettle once more. A new anti-terrorism bill. The draft bill aims to strengthen pre-existing anti-terrorism legislation. It will include key measures such as increased use of controversial computer algorithms to track down suspected terrorists. Those who are convicted of terrorism would be monitored for up to 2 years after their release from jail. There would also be home checks allowing officers with a warrant to enter the home of someone suspected of posing a terror threat. But are these measures enough to stop the attacks? The police officer Stéphanie Montfermé was killed last week by a Tunisian man who arrived in France illegally. After 10 years of being in an irregular situation, Jamel Gauchen was given the right to stay in France. For one former immigration minister, that is a much bigger part of the problem.
In a report published in 2019, Frontex stated that around 600 million people enter the EU every year, and around 20% of them are not in a database, which would make it possible to identify a criminal record or other risks. If nothing changes, we'll be at permanent risk of the type of situation that happened on Friday.
However, France's national coordinator in the fight against terrorism rejects the link between attacks and immigration.
Obviously, radicalized individuals in an irregular situation are expelled as a priority. Since 2015, 4/5 of the perpetrators of terrorist attacks on national territory are French nationals.
But elements of this new bill could also prove controversial, with lawmakers who are concerned with the tracking of people's internet search history that could be seen as an infringement of privacy, a touchy subject as it possibly concerns all French citizens.
The only thing that is very private for young people is our online discussions. If we do anything online, it's public. It's a bit disturbing for sure. Of course, if they find another solution, it would be better, one that helps them, but also allows us to have confidence, because we are talking about our private life.
The government can't do that like this, because it will be a lot, it will touch a lot the privacy of the people. So they have to find a bit more, something other that can let a bit of privacy for the person, for the citizen, to take a bit of privacy, and maybe they can find another solution that can be a better help.
I'm ready to lose some rights to eradicate terrorism, because it's a global scourge. It's not just here. We have to make decisions. We have to move. We've not taken enough action.
Now it's very, very difficult to stop all acts of terrorism. And if the government needs to reinforce the measures, I'm okay about that. As long as my freedoms are not completely restricted, I'm for it.
You know, actually, everyone has the right to have some privacy on the internet, because if the government is tracing it, then people will feel very bad about it, because everyone has the right to have the privacy.
France's first anti-terror law was passed in 1986, and since then legislation has been updated regularly, and there have been around 20 anti-terrorism laws. Have they, though, done enough to protect France, or is even tougher action needed?
I think that we can create as many laws as we want, but if there is no real action behind them, they're useless. In fact, for anti-terrorist actions and terrorists, I mean, we know how to act and where to find them. It's just the policy is often a bit confusing, and if the results of the law are good, that's great, but I doubt it.
People here in France understand the need to fight terrorism, but for many, they simply aren't sure that laws like this have brought any additional security. And the idea of giving up their privacy to combat the threat is simply too high a price. Charlotte Dubinsky, RT, Paris.
Now to that story that we told you we were following for you. We do have some developing news here. There is a sense of apprehension in North Carolina today as law enforcement braces for what could be a night of, well, of civil unrest. The reason: a judge has just refused to release a videotape that purports to show police officers shooting an African-American suspect in the back of the head. Again, the judge has chosen not to publicly release the tape. There are some caveats to this. And for more on this, I'm going to go over to RT correspondent John Huddy, who's been following this story that may turn into a tense night there in North Carolina. John, pick up the story for us. What's the latest? What did the judge rule?
Well, first of all, you're right. He ruled that based on a media request that the body cam video of the shooting will not be released publicly. However, you talked about the caveat. He said that the family of Andrew Brown Jr. will be allowed to view 4 body cam videos that stemmed from that shooting. So they only had a snippet. They were only able to view a snippet, about a 20-second clip of it. Now they'll be able to review the video in its entirety. So, we'll have to see what the public reaction is to the judge's ruling. But, right now, Elizabeth City is under a state of emergency, Rick, with an 8 p.m. curfew in effect after this police shooting, the sheriff deputy-involved shooting of Andrew Brown Jr. last week, and what his family and attorneys say was an execution. Sheriff's deputies shot and killed the 42-year-old Brown while carrying out a search and arrest warrants reportedly related to cocaine and methamphetamine distribution at his home in Elizabeth City. That's a city of about right around 19,000 people just south of the Virginia border in eastern North Carolina. An independent autopsy revealed Tuesday, or released Tuesday, shows that one of the deputies fatally shot Brown in the back of the head, according to the family's attorneys. The body cam footage, again, still hasn't been released to the public. The judge ruling that's not going to happen based on the media requests. And county officials there in North Carolina, also raising concerns about, whether the release of the body cam footage to the public will further inflame the situation, or by not releasing that, will it have the opposite effect? So, this is likely a process that will continue to go through the courts, Rick. In the meantime, Brown's family, as I said, was allowed to see a portion of that video footage. And as word of it spread, the size of the protests in Elizabeth City also has continued to grow. And both city and county officials say, they're working to try to quell the overall anger that's been building in the community, and perhaps, nationwide, stemming from yet this latest shooting. And as Elizabeth City remains under a state of emergency, city police have closed down, the roads and, area around the county courthouse and sheriff's department in the downtown part of the city. It's still unclear why the deputies opened fire, Rick. The AP reported that Brown may have been trying to drive away when deputies surrounded his car. But again, many questions remain about the circumstances involved with the shooting. The FBI has launched a federal civil rights investigation into it, as 7 of the deputies involved have been put on administrative leave. But again, public outrage continues, and we'll continue to follow it. Back to you, Rick.
Well, it is somewhat precarious given the fact that for the last week we've been watching some of the folks there, the protesters, chant, release the video, release the video. The fact that they're not releasing the video may not sit well with them. But thanks, John. We'll be following this story throughout the course of the evening and afternoon. Meanwhile, when it comes to foreign policy, the new president of the United States seems to be as hawkish as they come, which, by the way, is not different from his predecessor or his predecessor's predecessor. In fact, Mr. Biden's military budget doesn't only match up to the previous administration's, it goes above and beyond. Joining us now to talk about this is an Henri Lee Camp, who is a little perturbed about the fact that Mr. Biden's policies are as hawkish as they are. Describe your fury.
Well, I mean, he announced that the budget he wants for our Defense Department, our Department of War, is $753 billion, more than Trump's, more than obviously any other president has ever had. We're already spending $1 million a minute on our military and our war. I mean, it's so incredible when he says, oh, we're going to bring some of the troops out of Afghanistan in September, and we're going to decrease the war in Yemen. And he says these things. Meanwhile, he's asking for more money than ever. This is an unbelievable amount of money. Doesn't even account for the black budget, which really puts it over $1 trillion a year. $1 trillion, people can't even get the number into their head. But if you make $40,000 a year, it would take you 25 million years to make $1 trillion. So,
do you think is it a social construct in that he is a 70-year-old man who has a Cold War mentality because he came from the Cold War? I mean, he's only lived in that world. We are the United States, and we have to be enemies with country A, B, and C.
Well, yeah, and it's not just him. I mean, we've continued as if the Cold War continues, right? Our deep state, our CIA, et cetera, continue to cause coups around the world or economic war with Venezuela and Iran and so many other countries. So we act as if we're at war. We're doing it with vaccines right now. We act as if we're at war in so many ways when we're not at war with these countries. We don't even work towards peace, which decreasing the budget would be step one to working towards peace. And I think your average American is like, I can't get health care, but we have $1 trillion for military every year. You know, it's just, it's outlandish.
Is it about money? I mean, the average person listening, it's got to be about the money. If we stop that budget, there'd be a lot of people out of work. There'd be a lot of people who'd have to sell their homes in Potomac and places like that, right?
Well, I don't like the out of work argument because you could have jobs planting trees, honestly, if we wanted to, couldn't we?
I guess, right.
War is the only jobs out there. I mean, I think that they try and push that argument all the time, and yeah.
No, I'm saying the folks who have,
you mean the lobbyists?
No, I'm saying the folks who have those jobs are fighting to not give them up, and that's why they give Congress money.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's self-perpetuating, right?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. They make a lot of money from this, right?
See, now you got me ornery.
I made you angry about it.
Lee Camp, always a pleasure, man. Great conversation.
Thanks
Thank you
a lot.
so much.
Yeah.
And that's our news. Thanks so much for being with us, and we'll be looking for you again. Once again, we're going to be following that situation that we told you about in Elizabeth City. As we get more information, we'll share it with you. Meanwhile, thanks for being with us. Tell your friends about Portable TV, and we'll see you again when it's time to do news again. I'm Rick Sanchez.